Doing aileron rolls? Not in this type of aircraft. But something like this? Yes. Well, sort of. Since I earned my pilot's license in March 2012, I've consistently been asked the same question over and over again by friends and family that don't have any experience with general aviation. That question, of course, is if flying on a commercial airliner and the pilot becomes incapacitated, would I be able to land the plane?
Up. I'm gonna hit that sign.
Standing on the brakes.
The Boeing 737-200 was the workhorse of their low-cost carrier Delta Express launched in 1996. This fleet was entirely the Boeing 737-200. After Delta retired its last of the 737-200 aircraft in 2006, most of the other domestic airliners did the same. You can still find the 737-200 on a secondary market or smaller international airlines or possibly a cargo aircraft. After decommissioning these aircrafts, Delta had no use for this expensive flight simulator. So they decided to install it at the Delta Flight Museum in Atlanta. This became one of the only cost-effective way a civilian non-employee would be able to have access to this amazing technology. I knew this was on my aviation bucket list to try. This would give me the truest understanding of what I would do in an airliner.
Even we'll let roll. We have plenty of runway.
All right.
Push power all the way up. That's good. The airspeed's alive. 80 knots, cross check. 100 knots. 110. 120. V1, rotate.
Okay.
V2. And you want to keep your pitch attitude less than 15 degrees.
This scenario is similar to me being in the stands of a Cubs game and all the pitchers are sick, so they see me in a Cubs jersey and decide that they're going to make me the pitcher.
Looks like I'm on the numbers right here.
Right on.
So throttle back.
No, 30 feet. 30 feet looks for better.
Okay.
Not before.
100.
I was surprised by some of the realistic details, like the old tire marks at the beginning of the runway. My first landing was definitely a fail, and it felt way more stressful than I expected. It felt real. This is runway 27R, which is O'Hara's northernmost runway,
Hard landing.
7,500 feet long. I could have easily landed a small aircraft on the first third of this runway with no problem. Yet with the extra weight and the speed of the 737-200, I struggled to get it stopped. I pushed as hard as I could on the toe brakes and even attempted some aerodynamic braking, but it wasn't enough. About halfway through the procedure, the simulator operator mentioned the reverse thrusters, something I had zero experience with and didn't even know was a thing. Also, it was a bit of a hard landing. Not dangerous, but if the passengers were on board, they would not be happy. Now, I've had rough landings before and I know how they feel. The simulator moved in a way that made it feel very realistic.
Up. I'm gonna hit that sign.
Standing on the brakes.
Whoa.
Good.
Well, I didn't hit the fence at least, or the gas tanks.
Good shape.
Boy, I got my heart moving.
That's good.
The question of a private pilot flying a commercial airliner just shows how little interaction the public has with general aviation, or GA. General aviation is typically defined as anything that's not military or the airliners, which is huge. According to the General Aviation and Manufacturers Association, GMAA, general aviation contributes to $247 billion to the U.S. economy and employs 1.2 million people. When I fly with someone for the first time that's not used to general aviation, I compare aircraft to watercraft. And if your only experience with being on the water is a cruise ship, so you're distracted from the surroundings, you don't really feel the motion of the waves, you're able to move around, you may think that's how all boats work. Yet, most of us have experienced, tour boats or rowboats, those types of things, and feel somewhat safe on the water.
What, 40 knots? 50 knots. 60.
The same can be true for airplanes. On a commercial airliner, except for takeoff and landing, you got just a small little window. Passengers feel isolated from what the airplane's actually doing. Occasionally some turbulence, but for the most part smooth. In the small aircrafts I've flown, passengers will be within arm's reach of all the controls. They'll have the engine so loud that they have to wear headphones, and they'll have 360-degree views of everything.
434 Echo Papa radar contact over Nashville. Altitude indicates 1,200. Nashville altimeter 3003.
3003, 434 Echo Papa.
And of course, every kind of gust of wind or a change in throttle or flaps will be felt. This can all be alarming to passengers that expect to have that same kind of commercial airliner feel. I know I felt that same way in the beginning, but given a little bit of time, most passengers feel that it's safe and comfortable and fun.
3,000 feet above Nashville. This is Karen's first ride. She seems to be having a good time. What do you think, Karen?
I'm okay.
Excellent.
While descriptions vary greatly, in general, smaller aircrafts have propellers rather than jet engines. Smaller aircrafts have stationary landing gear rather than retractable ones. Smaller aircrafts are meant to go low and slow as opposed to high and fast. Smaller aircrafts typically carry a few passengers rather than 100 plus. Smaller aircrafts are intended to land in an emergency rather than have redundancies to prolong flight. You get the point.
500.
It's about 1.7.
Honolulu Airport. This is the principal runway, also known as the Reef Runway. It was the world's first major runway constructed entirely offshore. It's truly massive, 2.25 miles long and 200 feet wide. Completed in 1977, the Reef Runway was designated as an alternate landing site for the space shuttle.
100.
I feel like I'm going fast here.
40. 30.
Pull back.
20.
Hold it.
10.
Whoop. You don't
I just
give us
bounced.
a little extra bit. You'll bounce every time.
There we go.
There you are. Not bad.
Ironically, 2 days prior to this experience, a 737-200 cargo plane took off at that airport and immediately had engine failure. They were unable to make it back to the airport in time, and the crash landed into the ocean. Both pilots survived. You can learn more about this crash if you Google Transair Flight 810. As a U.S. pilot, I can legally fly almost any size single-engine aircraft carrying unlimited amount of passengers to almost 18,000 feet. Yet, the reality of a single-engine aircraft is going to be about a 2 to 4 seater up to about 10,000 feet. A pilot of my years of experience and my hours usually would have sought additional credentials such as instrument rating or multi-engine rating. Since I'm not seeking a career in aviation, I decided just to have fun with it and enjoy my license. I enjoy flying different aircrafts and different scenarios. This includes seaplanes, helicopters, mountain flying, aerobatics. Yes, I've done some training in instrument and twin engines. I've acquired some skills in those aircrafts, but I wouldn't consider myself confident in any of them.
Okay.
Get the positive rate. You're up. Okay, so now you're approaching 20. And you'll see your airspeed start to decrease.
In the U.S., to obtain an airline transportation pilot's license, the pilot has to log about 1,500 hours. For most pilots, the majority of these hours take place in a small aircraft. Providing instructions to student pilots is one of the more cost-effective ways for a pilot to obtain these hours. So how does a pilot usually transition to flying these larger aircrafts? Co-piloting for some, but most airline pilots spend significant time in complex simulators. This may come as a surprise to some that their pilots learned essentially by playing video games, but this has been nothing new. In the 1920s, the link trainer, also known as the blue box, trained most pilots. Later, it was used to train almost every pilot on both sides during World War II. The military first started purchasing these in 1934 for around $3,500 each, about the equivalent of around 70 grand in today's money. In 2000, it was designated as a historic mechanical engineering landmark, next to other important technologies such as the Apollo spacesuit and the Gutenberg printing press. As aviation technology has improved, so has flight training devices, or FTDs. I've used them myself when weather conditions or otherwise haven't been favorable for flight. The FAA gives criteria about what type of equipment and how it can be used for a pilot to obtain credit. Most flight instructors will go ahead and claim that a cockpit is a horrible classroom. FTDs are safe and the instructor can pretty much control anything within the cockpit. If you want to be technically correct, the device has to move in order to be called a simulator. That's when these devices come in handy. This is a $15 million replica of a Boeing 737-200. Delta used this one to train pilots, and the cockpit is identical to what the airline pilots would really experience. Now keep in mind, a brand new 737-200 would cost around $4 million. So this bad boy was about 3 to 4 times more expensive than the real thing. Yet, it was a good investment for Delta, as they are safer, cheaper to operate and maintain.
120, 130, and rotate.
Located in Rio, this airport is famous for having the shortest runways which a Boeing or an Airbus can land.
Sure. I bet you're right. I bet you that's correct there.
I think these are television cameras here.
At 4,200 feet, this runway is shorter than most U.S. general aviation airports. Chances are this will be the only time I fly an aircraft internationally. Certainly not going to another country and attempt to fly an aircraft that has not been maintained and inspected based upon EU standards. Oh, and it was neat to fly by a digital version of the 98-foot tall Christ the Redeemer statue as well.
Well, you need
50,
power.
40,
Sync rate. Sync rate.
Up.
Pull it back again. Pull it back. Just hold it. Just hold it there.
I'm the bounce, yeah.
So the question remains, could I land an airliner in an emergency? I'm going to go ahead and have to figure that these are realistic as they use them for training. And it was surprisingly familiar. And when I was in the air, I didn't notice any difference. Takeoff was a similar situation. As for landing, while I was able to perform a reasonably safe landing in a simulator, I did have several advantages that wouldn't have happened in a real incapacitated pilot scenario. For example, the weather was ideal, calm winds, perfect visibility. I started off the simulator on the ground, so I was able to picture how the aircraft would be when we landed. Each approach was performed as a precision approach, and I've had a fair amount of instrument training, so I was comfortable navigating off the VOR. I've also had several hours of multi-engine training, so I understood how to coordinate those engines. There was no other airplanes in the sky, nor did I have to deal with ATC, and of course, yes, I had the simulator operator there to ask questions of. So, under ideal conditions, I think I could probably get the aircraft down in one piece. Learning about those reverse thrusters was a game changer for me. That being said, I think that the autopilot would do much better in an emergency than I would. Definitely an overall amazing experience. I understand it's just a glorified video game. I'm not tracking the hours in my logbook, but I'm glad that Delta made this a possibility to the public. At the end of the video, I've got some extra footage for the real aviation geeks, but for now, aileron rolls. Okay, so I said I did aileron rolls in a 737. Of course now, it's obvious I'm talking about the flight sim. First, I don't even think it's physically possible to do an aileron roll in a 737. Second, I'm not even sure who I could ask that would be able to confirm that statement.
Wow.
Bank
Push.
angle.
Push.
Bank
push,
angle.
Push.
And then
Bank
Go
angle.
back.
Bank angle.
Keep it turning.
Bank angle.
Keep it turning.
Bank angle.
there we go. Okay. How much? I lost 1,200 feet.
That's not too bad.
I've done rolls in real airplanes, so I'm familiar with what to expect. And it was a great visual looking out the window, and for a minute did trick my mind to think I was actually happening. The physical sensation did not match the visual. I knew the simulator wasn't capable of going inverted. Heck, I wasn't even wearing a seatbelt, so it would have been pretty bad if it did. I think my expectations were set too high based upon what I experienced in the sim up to that point. Let's see, this is the timer. RPM, is that what this is? Airspeed indicator. This is DME, so that's a navigation tool.
We won't be using that for navigation.
Okay. And so this is more batteries, this type of thing?
It's all engines.
Okay.
The only ones we're going to look at are these.
Okay.
EPR, which is engine pressure ratio, which is basically thrust.
Okay.
These hardly change, but oil temperature might change a little bit, but these don't change. These change a lot.
Sure.
Slowest.
How about airspeed? Do we have airspeed on there? So this is the airspeed indicator then?
So you've got a digital readout here
Okay.
and an analog readout.
Okay.
The barber pole is the maximum safe airspeed, whatever
Okay.
conditions you're in.
And stall speed is?
Depends on the configuration. But
Okay.
you'll get a warning if it shakes the stick.
Sure. What about the rotation speed?
It's going to be, with our weight today, it's going to be about 131, 132.
Okay.
So I'll call out your speeds. V1 is going to be 130, and I'll say it's going to be V1, rotate, and V2 is going to be about 140.
140 is to, okay. So then we take off with flaps, no flaps?
5 flaps for takeoff.
Okay.
As we approach 200 knots, we work the flaps to 0.
Okay.
It's not critical. This plane is not touchy at all. If we forget to put them up, you get to about 200 knots, you start to feel vibration.
Okay. So, do you gotta incrementally bring it up, or
I usually go from 5 to 1,
Okay.
and then all the way down.
Okay. Then landing configuration is?
Flaps 30.
Okay.
The trim, so you have stabilizer trim. The manual is not working in here. There's cold parts on it. They don't fix simulators in this one.
Sure.
But we have the manual for the electrical over here. So
Okay.
by your left thumb,
Right here? Yeah, here.
you just touch that switch.
Okay.
Give it a touch. There's 2 of them. You have to do both. You can go up and down.
Is that working?
After you move them both down.
Like that, okay.
And actually, what you did there, that's about as much as you used at a time.
Okay.
Now, the computer set it for takeoff. It's right, it's got an indicator there. It's right
Sure.
It's mid-range.
I see that, yeah.
It will stay there, and that's fine for what we're doing. Just stay right there.
Okay.
If we were going up to